Our guest in the studio for this hour, wherever you're tuned in around the country, in Nairobi on our different frequencies and our live stream on YouTube. Joining us in the Situation Room this morning is our good friend, journalist Kwamchetsi Makokha, and he's with us today. Kwam, good morning.
Good morning.
Karibu sana.
Asante.
Makokha.
Makokha. I want to put the H and I want to say it properly. But he's such a gentleman, he's not going to correct
Ask the
me.
man how it is pronounced.
Okay. The way you would say it when you are at home, Kwamchetsi, how would it be?
Don't anglicize it.
No, I'm easy. Easy, but it's Kwamchetsi, Makokha.
You see? Makokha, right? Makokha. Okay. Karibu sana.
Asante, shukran.
So, I mean, jumping and getting off into this conversation with you, because this is something that you studied well and are keeping abreast of. The whole ICC Hague happenings and the situation when Paul Gicheru presented himself in the Netherlands many months ago. Perhaps it wasn't what he was expecting, that we've seen things go so quickly then into a trial. What do you make of this whole situation? Maybe we can talk about what exactly is going on with this case at the ICC right now, and what does it portend for the country?
Thank you. I have been watching the ICC for a while, I think going on to 10 years.
Yeah.
And working as journalist for justice, I had a front row seat with all the processes at the court. And it's one of the things, the Gicheru surrender is very puzzling because since his arrest warrant came out, he took 5 years before he surrendered. He had 5 years to ruminate and think this over and then decided one day, no, I'm just going to go and clear my name. For me, I think that just first of all rings a warning bell because I don't think that Paul Gicheru was acting if he's indeed guilty. He was acting on for his own benefit. There were people who were beneficiaries of the scheme to interfere with witnesses. The clearest beneficiary is Deputy President William Ruto, whose case collapsed. He denied us a trial. Yeah, right. Yeah, he denied us a trial because the witnesses pulled out or died. And that's it. So this case basically investigates what happened to some of those witnesses. And Paul Gicheru has been wanted for the past 5 years alongside Walter Osapiri and Philip Bett for interfering with witnesses. There are people who came forward and said, look, there are people who approached us. They've told us to pull out of this case and not to give evidence. And so the prosecution began this case to try and stall the interference in the Ruto Sang case. Right.
Even as we look at it, because now we're getting coverage on a daily basis, we're seeing this, and the trial is moving actually very quickly, maybe a lot quicker than Gicheru himself thought this would happen. As he presented himself in the Netherlands many months ago, I mean, we can't tell what his personal intent was, but it would, as you say, seem as though he wanted to go and clear his name. There'd been 5 years since an arrest warrant had been sent out. They knew where he was.
Yes.
Why would they not have come for him if it was so important for him to be tried?
They did. They did. They asked for Kenya to extradite him. I think there have been like 4, 5, 8 memoirs from the office of the prosecutor begging the Attorney General in Kenya and the Minister for Interior to extradite these 3 individuals because, as you know, witness interference or interfering in the administration of justice is the equivalent of contempt of court in Kenya. Contempt of court is supposed to be summarily tried because you are challenging the authority of the court. And so because of that, that's why I think this trial is moving at the speed at which it is, because it's supposed to protect the integrity of the court process. Now, the office of the prosecutor asked for extradition. They issued arrest warrants. Initially, they were sealed. They communicated them to the Kenya government. The Kenya government told them to, take a hike, right? So they opened up, they unsealed those warrants and made them public in the hope, of course, that that would cause embarrassment. The Kenyan government, I think, is not easily embarrassed. So once the warrants were issued, then the individuals went to court, and there's been long litigation in the Kenyan courts, basically stalling the attempt to extradite them and creating excuses for the government not to surrender them. So it was puzzling that with the protection that Gicheru had from the Kenya government, and also, he was chair of the public procurement oversight board. So it's a government appointee. So with all that protection, he elected at some point, 5 years down the line, that no, I suddenly have a conscience and I need to clear it. Yeah, I need to clear my name.
Isn't it ironic? You see, the public procurement, there's a bit to it, and disposal. You see, there's a disposal bit. And then this person who was charged with actually making every attempt that could possibly be known to dispose of justice is ironically made the chairman of this particular board, a really important board. But that having been said, on a light note, when Mr. Gicheru's going to The Hague didn't happen in isolation. No.
Full glare.
Full glare, but other things were also happening. It isn't just that somebody had a crisis of conscience and suddenly decided that the best thing for him to do was to set things right before the Hague and his creator.
So why? No. And I think that's a question that many are asking. Why? You know that folks have been looking for you. You know that there's potentially damning evidence against your name and this entire case that you had previously built in your favor, right? These things are there, they exist, because there's no way they're asking. There's no way they're asking for extradition. There's no way a warrant of arrest has been given if there isn't something that can hold water that these folks have against you. Why take yourself to the foot of the door of potential trouble?
When did he take himself to The Hague?
Well, we're talking about 7 months ago now?
Precisely. Was that before or after the handshake?
Post
handshake.
Precisely. Now, what did the handshake and everything that happened after it, what did it portend?
Do you see a connection?
Absolutely. I mean, it's clear. I'm resisting making that conclusion, but I think anyone who looks at it clearly can just see it's as clear as day. Yeah, because he had 5 years. He had 5 years in which he was wanted by International Criminal Court. He didn't have time for them. In fact, he went to the Kenyan court and obtained orders to block his extradition. But suddenly, he decided that protection is not sufficient. It's not even necessary. I will fly myself at my personal cost to the Netherlands and turn myself into the Dutch authorities.
How often do you see that happening?
This is why it is particularly puzzling, as you have said, because unless he thought that with the changeover of power at the prosecutor's seat, that there would be something that they would be able to overlook, that there would be some kind of evidence then that was, because you remember during the 5 years, the prosecutor had changed twice that we are looking at now. Between the 5 years and the time we had gone from Ocampo to Bensouda and then to now Khan, right?
No, actually, it's just been Bensouda.
At the time, between those 5 years,
yeah.
So, I'm saying by the time all of these cases had started, so we're looking at the third prosecutor from the very beginning of 2007 until now, right? So could it be that the words that he heard Bensouda say at some point when she had mentioned things like lack of evidence, that this then now applied to, or lack of witnesses wanting to come forward anymore, so they had to then dispose of cases, kind of? Could it have made some kind of sense in his head that, all right, even if I turn myself in, there would be nothing that they would have to hold me by the short and curlies? Really?
I'm sorry, but we first of all must put this in context, which is that Paul Gicheru is a fairly seasoned lawyer.
So exactly,
he's not a layman like me and you. He's a lawyer. He understands law. He understands court processes.
So why
he knows? So by the time he is taking this risk, my assumption would be that he actually knows the consequences and he knows how it's going to turn out. And so we must wonder what's at play.
Secondly, if you want to consider, for instance, a seasoned lawyer, a man who understands how the game is played, he knows the lay of the land well, of what benefit would this be to him? Because you cannot say that he has offered himself to be a sacrificial lamb in a situation such as this one. somebody whose name has been associated with what we know happened in 2008. This isn't your average Kenyan ID carrying citizen. No. This is someone who has been involved in things that most of us can't even begin to contemplate.
True.
So for them to take themselves, the question that I asked, and I'm in agreement with you, what puzzled me was, what understanding did he arrive at with whoever he needed to arrive at with these understandings for him to take this step? And what else was discussed with the Hague? Because this thing, in my mind, it looks choreographed. That's my view. What do you think?
This thing up until what point? It could have been choreographed until the point at which he presented himself at The Hague, and then things seem to hurtle in the opposite direction. Like, all right, if you go and...
But is it hurtling in the opposite direction, really?
Do you think the fellow is enjoying this case the way it is right now, where people are calling his name and the name of his boss?
He does not look distressed.
You think
I saw him.
Tell us about
I saw
that.
him in court yesterday. He doesn't look distressed. He seemed very calm.
You think things are playing out in the way in
I
which
think
they
so.
thought they would?
I think so, because if he actually was afraid of The Hague, which the three of them were, the three of them who were under arrest warrants for witness interference, they were really, really scared of The Hague. They didn't want to go to The Hague. They used the Kenyan court system, succeeded, prevented the Attorney General and the Minister for Interior from extraditing them. Now, he has somehow overcome that fear. So it must be on, as City says, there must be an understanding. There must be an understanding
Between
that
who
whatever
and
pain,
whom?
whatever pain that is going to accrue from the ICC is something he can live with.
Kwam, you're saying something that could shed light and almost talk about the compromise of the court. That could lead to that, and understand, and that's why I'm asking. And that's why I'm asking.
I wouldn't go
I'm
that
asking
far.
the question.
Yes.
Understanding between who and whom on this other side. Like, just go present yourself. Whatever happens, we'll find a way to
But
take
do.
care of you. What exactly are we
Do.
taking?
Do.
What are we saying here? Make it
Do
plain as day.
Our own judicial system allows for negotiation.
That's what I'm asking.
So
Understanding between who and whom.
I'll bore you with some background detail.
Please bore us.
The Kenya government was a big player in the ICC cases, and intelligence was a big player in the ICC cases. So it had an active and ongoing interest right from the get-go. From the gathering of evidence, you remember police officers and senior police officers being prevented by court order from, swearing affidavits for the Hague. So the Kenya government knows what case is available at the Hague, and it instrumentalizes that process when it suits it. Right? It instrumentalizes that process. The court, I think, operates, in the traditional sense, and which is why sometimes I'm a bit hesitant about those things, because the court operates like it's operating in a clean, sterile environment.
Right.
Unfortunately, all of us are doing things to influence how that's going to play out. So the court is sitting there saying, we are blind. Lady Justice is blind. She's blindfolded. And we're just sitting here and waiting for the cases to be brought. Other people are planning how this can be an important staging post for making political statements.
Right.
Or for making other statements of guilt or innocence.
If I may contribute a little history as well, you see, being Kenyan often places upon you a very heavy burden of history. Whenever there have been incidents in this country that we've considered bizarre and puzzling and tragic, like the death of one Dr. Robert Ouko, the matter went to court. Something very similar to what happened with the witnesses in this case that went to The Hague happened. People just started dying off.
Falling off the face of the earth.
No known epidemic was taking place at that particular point in time.
There was no COVID then.
There was nothing you could attribute it to. But somehow, that driver, the bodyguard, people who could have actually lent, information, they all died. So that the case, no matter what you did with it, simply couldn't stand. So now when you have something like the case in The Hague, and then again, the same condition, the same situation, sort of like replays itself, You suddenly say, no. There's nothing natural about this. This is contrived. This is something that has been stage managed. And unfortunately, there's something about the truth. Inconvenient as it usually is, it will always out. Because when things are planned, the word planned, it has to be beyond you. If it is me, then I am just configuring it. The moment I use the word plan, I could plan it in my mind, but I'm involved others. Now, the moment others are involved, then the statute of limitation on the secrecy of it depends very much on one simple thing, that we continue getting along.
Okay. If Kwamchetsi, you were going to spell it out, for the people who are sitting and watching this thing and talking about the significance that this case then bears for the country and for other names that have been mentioned. I mean, we're looking at the testimony that we've heard from the numbered witnesses over the last couple of days, and the big man has been mentioned. Gicheru himself having been mentioned, saying, here you are, 1.6 million shilling was the running cost. That was the minimum. 1.4 is how much, we could buy your testimony for. What significance would it bear if Gicheru, for example, is convicted? 1. 2, how or whom would it benefit if he has been sent, or rather is being tried right now, and would he be covering for the multitude of sins of somebody else and then allowed to be the sacrificial lamb? What are we looking at here? If we're to bare knuckle say as it is.
I'll take you a little back, and I would start at this point of saying, one is that there is an epidemic of impunity in this country. And that impunity, we exported it to The Hague. So the trial of Paul Gicheru, and whatever the outcome, the trial of Paul Gicheru is very significant for this country, because it says, one, as City was saying, the truth doesn't die. You can kill the witnesses, the truth doesn't die. So it's a very significant thing that we are revisiting this, the consequences notwithstanding that, you can't interfere in a truth-telling process. And that's really what that trial was supposed to be. We don't know if the people who are charged were guilty or not. And the only reason we don't know is because the witnesses either died or were intimidated or disappeared, or something happened to them. And that is a very, very grave thing, because what it does is that it creates a culture of silence and fear. And we are trying to rise above that culture of silence and fear and impunity, saying, if somebody has done something, people should be able to speak up about it. So the trial of Paul Gicheru, I think, is significant in that respect. We will look at the political end of it, which is that this means something for one political player or another. But for me, I look at it in terms of the culture of the country. And as City was saying earlier, we have a culture of disappearing witnesses. Witnesses have been disappeared from the time of Pio Gama Pinto's assassination, Tom Joseph Mboya, Agwins Golek, J.M. Kariuki, Robert Ouko. We disappear witnesses.
Did you ever find Kou Karumba?
No. Disappeared in Uganda.
Yes.
Right? And it's this is an important step for this country. I think Kenya needs to take a lesson from this thing of, you can't kill your witnesses. We have a whole whistleblower protection law. And we also we have a certain casualness around it, I think, which needs to stop. But to your second question about the consequences, my view is that we can be dramatic about it, but I suspect that we might also not be dramatic about it. Because the person this really hurts, in the moral economy is Dr. William Ruto, because he's the beneficiary. If actually what they're accusing Gicheru of happened, he's the beneficiary of that, which the judges said there were intolerable levels of witness interference. That's the reason for terminating his case. So he's the beneficiary of that. However, William Ruto, I think, does not have capacity for shame or embarrassment.
Well, okay.
Yeah? So just because of that, because he's a gentleman who had no problem discrediting victims. Yeah, discrediting victims. You can imagine somebody denying somebody denying your pain and your suffering. At some point when I was making a bad documentary, I remember visiting Kiambaa. And Kiambaa, up to
Kiambaa
today...
in Kiambu or Kiambaa?
No, Kiambaa in Wasingishu, Eldoret. And Kiambaa, to date, the site of the church is walled with a perimeter fence, is walled, but there's nothing on the spot. And the reason there's nothing on the spot is because the memorialization of the signature image of the post-election violence, just the burning of the church, has been denied. Yeah, it continues to be publicly denied and put under the carpet. And it's a thing that, I don't know if it's the community or the leadership, they are not ready to address. So although we agree, yes, there are over 30 souls who are lost in that church, the memorialization is problematic. It's problematic. There are people who've come forward, they provided resources to say, let's build a monument, even just a very simple memorial saying something happened here.
Has not been done.
They can't do it.
In the studio this morning, and we're having our conversation, CT Muga Nduoko, and joining us, journalist Kwamchetsi Makokha, and we're looking at this Paul Gicheru case at the ICC this morning, asking ourselves questions about, what's going on, looking at the facts and saying, why are things happening at the speed at which they are? Kwamchetsi, before we went to the break, just looking at some of the things that you had mentioned, talking about moral responsibility that is had, remembering those who suffered. One of the things that we saw early last week at the Hague was that there was the request by the prosecution that there would be compelling of witnesses to give their testimony. Why do you think that was insisted on in the manner in which it was, that it was quite heavy? That say, before it was an invitation to come and give your testimony, but now there was the compelling that was what was requested. Why do you think that was?
Fortunately, unfortunately, I think the guys who did the witness interference were I think they were careless. They were careless, they were sloppy, and they got caught. So far, when you even begin looking at the evidence they have, the recordings of the conversations that they had, and they've sort of gone through this and verified, it's pretty damning. Yeah, it's pretty damning, and they basically do have evidence that, places certain individuals at the crime scene.
The unintended consequences of impunity. Because when people are careless, it's often with an understanding that
nothing will happen to them.
Precisely. So they don't really care. They don't cover their tracks.
Plus, before that, with the previous prosecutions, had we not seen that there were certain witnesses who then did either recant their testimony or just decline to appear?
That really is the nub. I think that's the nub of the Gicheru case. That, the prosecutor went into this, for lack of a better word, rather naively, expecting, that this is going to run as a judicial process. She was handed a political card, and she was just unable to deal. By the time they were trying to save this case, the Ruto Sang case. And we must not also look at this in isolation. We must, I think, be brave enough to say the witness interference, intimidation, resulting in withdrawal or death of witnesses affected both the Kenyatta case and the Ruto case. Yeah, so I don't think that we can paint black and white here. We must be honest enough to say that witness interference happened for both cases. For the Ruto one, it probably was egregious and took, it was careless. It was careless enough for them to be caught.
You know what is strange when you think about it? The question that you want to ask is, why scare witnesses and why treat this whole case, why embedded in so much fear and secrecy? It's because all you're doing is you're stemming the tide of people who might want to come forward as witnesses.
City, I will go a step further.
Yes.
I would actually say if you are innocent and there's nothing you have done, why would you be afraid of people coming to speak about that event? So we can only surmise, we can only conclude that it is out of guilt. Yeah, it's out of guilt that you would interfere with witnesses. Because if you really were not involved in a crime, you didn't do anything wrong, why would you be so worried that you actually set up a whole plan? They are calling it the common plan.
Yeah.
They set up a whole plan to identify witnesses. They hunted them down. They looked for them outside this jurisdiction. They found them. They either bought them or they intimidated them. And you must wonder. You must then wonder if the charges that were terminated, therefore, were groundless, were as groundless as we've been made to believe. For me, this opens the Pandora's box about the post-election violence of 2007, 2008.
And what does it open to?
It says that our political leaders on both sides are culpable. Yeah, it says that our political leaders did something criminal. Yeah, we may not have the bullets. Yeah? We may not have the filings, but at least we have the smoke and we have the report of the gun.
What does this mean? I mean, just before we went to the break, you had alluded about then the political responsibility or accountability. On this side of the pond, if things are being choreographed here, what does it spell out? On this side, saying what can or cannot be done should Gicheru's trial come to an end, and what if he is convicted? What does that mean?
I haven't looked at the law, but I suspect that crimes against the administration of justice will probably earn him about 2 to 3 years, with time already served and remission. He might probably just be home. He might be home next year or the year after if they conclude. And this is a single trial. It's not a complicated case. It's before one judge.
But in your opinion, also, would this sort of case be the sort of case that offers sufficient grounds for reopening of the case, so that other details that they had tried to look at but were not able to because of the circumstances that we're describing, would it lend itself to such an eventuality?
I think there's a remote possibility, but I think there are 3 political considerations. The first is you must look at who is in the office of the prosecutor. And the guy who is in the office of the prosecutor right now, the Honorable Karim Khan, Queen's Counsel, was also Dr. William Ruto's lawyer.
Yes.
So he has so far had to recuse himself from this prosecution. So that's one. I don't know if there's appetite to prosecute the Kenyan cases at the ICC. 2, the ICC cases, the Kenya cases at the ICC were very costly to that institution because of the campaign that Kenya waged at the international level, both at the UN and the African Union. They were extremely politically costly. I have friends in there, and they spoke to me and they said, "You Kenyans are just a pain in all the wrong places." They don't want a repeat. Yeah, I think the ICC doesn't want a repeat because what Kenya did to that court damaged it. Yeah.
How? Can you give an explanation? I mean, how?
One is just the discrediting. Kenya went to the UN General Assembly, said, please have these cases deferred. They went to the African Union and they intimidated the court and said, all our members, and Africa has the highest number of signatories to the Rome Statute, the 34. They said, we are actually going to pull out. And some actually did pull out. I think I remember Burundi pulled out. So it was just very, very costly. It created a very negative energy. And that has had an impact on the functioning of the court in terms of it weakened its moral voice. And that's something, if you are the leader of that court, if you're the prosecutor of that court, you really, really don't want to go down that rabbit hole anymore.
I would have thought that would have strengthened it because,
Indeed.
I mean, we're saying essentially that other cases that have come before the court, they have never witnessed such pushback.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so such pushback ought to tell you this may not be the only country that's going to push back. We may have other cases.
Precisely. Duterte in Philippines
Yes.
has also done a pull-out, and, he's supposed to be, he's a suspect. It's just one of the things, I think if you wanted to be an optimist, you would say that Kenya's aggression has actually grown the stature of the international criminal justice. Yes, it has.
That is what I was looking at. Because, you see, in all honesty, everything that went on at The Hague and everything that's still going on at The Hague, it's instructive. One hears of the International Criminal Court, but the functioning, the workings are always vague at best. But when there's a case that involves your country, you now have a front row seat. Because you can actually see the goings on, and as a Kenyan, the things you look at and say, why don't they see what is happening here? Because you know what is happening, and you wonder, did they think it was going to be a walk in the park? This is a question I'm asking. What did they think? You're accusing two people who at some point become the president, the deputy of the. What do you think is going to happen? Think about it. These are Kenyans. No, let's start with that. These Africans, these are Kenyans.
Okay.
What do you think they're going to do?
In the studio this morning, CT Muga Nduoko and journalist Kwamchetsi Makokha, and we're looking at this Paul Gicheru case, the ICC case, The Hague. The bigger picture, I think, is extremely important here, Kwamchetsi. I think there have been a lot of political statements. There have been a lot of political innuendo about what could be happening here. But what is something that we ought not to run away from in terms of where we should be focusing? Because many things have been said. Just looking at the things that have been said from the trial, from the court in the last 1 week, witness tampering, fear that is coming from witnesses that have disappeared over the last 5 years, people who had testimony to give, people who even received money and then were ready to come out and say, we received the money, but here we don't want it anymore. We want to tell the truth about what happened. And then they're not there tomorrow. Witness protection, which was supposed to be a thing from the ICC, that then still had people disappearing. Witness tampering. I mean, it's foreboding on anything that would come in the future, that there would be a case whereby Kenyans had information about something that could either lead to the recovery of funds, justice for life. But looking at something like this would say, absolutely not. I will not then help in any way, shape or form. I will not give my testimony because I could be disappeared tomorrow. My family would be without me. I mean, what does that say about the state of things as we see it today?
I go back to your earlier question, which is, what is this really about? The hard facts, which are undisputed, 1,133 people were killed, 2007, 2008. 950 women were sexually violated. 600,000 people were rusticated from their homes. Those are the facts. Now, we can dress this up in political clothes and say we are trying to finish people one way or the other, but really that is the basis. We can't forget that. It's a long time ago, yes, but the wounds from 2007 and 2008, I meet many of those victims today. The wounds have not healed. They will not heal.
You see, at the end of the day, sir, one of the things that discussing a case such as this one does, it obscures the lines of the actual happenings that eventually led to The Hague. The Hague didn't happen on its own. Something happened that brought the cases of our president and his deputy to The Hague. And the end result of what happened was people died.
True.
1,100 people were displaced. Many of them still displaced.
True.
Many of them can't even go back to their land because to date, they still fear for their lives. To date.
Yeah.
So when one talks about the issues of The Hague, to me, what is pertinent is why it is the issues that brought about this situation are not being faced head on. If anything, it's like we look for every which way to divert our attentions from it and talk about everything else other than what it is. Because it's like we want to quickly forget that people died. We want to quickly forget that people were displaced. We want to quickly forget that the reason why these two individuals went to The Hague was because of what happened.
That's true. And there's also now another thing now thinking about this, and I probably had about 10 years to think about this. there is also a burden of guilt. And that burden of guilt, collective guilt especially, is what enables us to excuse the people who are accused. Because when we look at post-election violence and we all examine ourselves carefully and individually, you will find that a very large number of people actually took part in that violence. And so they are able to identify, they are able to empathize with those people who have been put in the dock and saying, actually, no, if you are charging them, it could also come to me. We have to be able to have a conversation that separates and says, these are the ones responsible. Yeah, they are responsible for the biggest portion of the violence. That yes, we acknowledge that you are also guilty, and create opportunities for you to speak about it and to purge your guilt. But Kenyans like to collapse their own guilt, and a lot of people did bad things in that period. Yeah, either speech or action. A lot of people did bad things, and nothing has happened to them. And so the reason why we avoid this conversation about PEV is because a lot of us fear that when justice comes, it could be knocking on your door.
There's the conversation that takes place in hushed voices about the many young men who supposedly were killed in the Rift Valley and buried in mass graves. It's a conversation that if you hear whispers of, it disappears quicker than it appeared. You see, it follows a trajectory of how we deal with tragic events in this country. Something that ought to be faced, ought to be acknowledged for what it is. If there's reconciliation, if there's compensation, whatever needs to be done is done, but it's out in the open. Because if that doesn't happen, then the lingering problem is that we stand a chance of seeing a repetition of the same thing. Because it's like it's always torturing. It's never really far from the surface.
If you were to cast your eye into the near future, however near that would be, with the conclusion of this case, which from all indications is not going to be too long from now, the way things have started and the way we see things going, what does it mean for Kenya as a country, regardless of the outcome, whether he is found guilty and then convicted or otherwise let go? What is it? These two scenarios, what picture does it paint for Kenya?
One is that interfering in the administration of justice is not on. But you see, that lesson will only land if Kenya also releases the other two suspects. There are two other people who are wanted at the ICC on the same witness interference case, the Ruto Sang case. So if Kenya actually wanted to learn a lesson from this, is actually to finish with that whole chapter and say there are people who are wanted with witness interference, subject them to legal process, find them guilty or not guilty, and then, let's close that chapter. There's an element of duplicity with the Kenya government with regard to these cases. And I think that duplicity needs to be laid bare so that, we are able to deal with this once and for all. The second thing is also just the value that this society wants to place on whistleblower protection, witness protection. We have laws for that, but everybody knows that, if you take that path of blowing the whistle, you are calling attention upon yourself, and you are calling for consequences that sometimes you might not be able. Our stories of whistleblowers are not redeeming. Yeah, all our episodes about how we've dealt with whistleblowers, from as high as John Githongo to David Munyakei at the Central Bank, they are not redeeming. Yeah, they are not the best. That's not the best version of ourselves.
Neither is it encouraging for anybody who wants to come forward and say, look, I have information that would actually help. I mean, it seems like almost an obvious answer, but then what should the situation be whereby you have members of the society, citizens of the country, who are concerned about what's happening, whether we're talking about criminal activity, loss of funds, loss of life, etc., etc. What should the situation be when we're saying you're going to the highest court for criminal activity in the world, or you're going to an apex court here in the country?
What my brother has just said gets to the heart of the matter. this country is a criminal enterprise. This country. Okay? What do you think we always talk and read about? Now, China, who understand these things, anytime you steal from state coffers, it's considered a crime against humanity. They shoot you. Okay?
No
Meaning they want to
questions
make sure you are... There's no... Finished, done with. Now, how do you explain a situation where people are always involved? They may think it's a little corruption, but it's a corruption. Now, when you mention the Hague to such a person, they know the wrong they have done. And the unfortunate thing is that many of us are in that shoe. So anything that shines a bright light on justice is not something you want to be at the periphery. You want to deal with just enough of it, but not too much of it. So when it comes to actually seeking justice, look at the pelting and look at the force of interference that even our judicial system even currently has. They do what they're supposed to do. Do you think people sit back and say, well, this is what they've done? No. It is fought at every turn. Now, it's good for our system in that we are maturing, but it also tells you about our underbelly.
No, and we politicize now. We politicize our impunity. We go into politics to create protection for our impunity. And we allow these conversations to be conflated and to be collapsed together so that, criminal guilt is politicized, and then, we instrumentalize it and say, we are being targeted as a community or being targeted as a gender or something else, but it's actually just criminal activity. Yeah.
It doesn't matter who is perpetrating.
No.
It's criminal activity.
It's criminal activity. It's criminal activity. We separate criminal activity from politics because politics is about sorting out our lives, sorting out our priorities.
On a final note, Kwamchetsi, who then is supposed to be the vanguard of this belief? Who then is supposed to say, you know what, folks, we cannot continue to operate like this. Things have got to take a switch.
It's got to be the citizen, because really, look at Kenya's constitution. Kenya's constitution says we must invest in the citizen, who is the sovereign. We have hijacked that sovereign power. We've hidden it in State House. We've hidden it in Parliament. We've hidden it in other places. But really, it has got to be the citizen who says, this is not where I want to raise my children. This is not what I want my children to be. This is not who I want to be. This is not what I want my neighborhood to be. This is not what I want my county to be. This is not what I want my country to be. Once the citizens make that decision, the rest becomes fairly easy. And you know what? We actually have a moment. There was a moment there in 2003 at the beginning, after the election of NAC, when citizens actually realized that, no, they were just being intimidated into giving bribes. And they started arresting police officers and saying, no, you are not going to extort us. So that conscience is there. It just needs to be awakened and the opportunity to exercise it.
Kwamchetsi, always a pleasure to have you here, talking about these very, very important things and seeing how things will progress over the next couple of weeks. It would be great to have you back to open it up a little bit more. Asante.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.